It was a big house, almost like a small palace, with shining floors, glass walls, and a calm garden that looked like it came out of a dream. But inside that beauty there lived a quiet maid who worked from sunrise to late at night. Her name was Lena. She moved through the halls like a soft wind, present but barely noticed. Every morning she would tie her hair back, put on her uniform, and start cleaning one room after another. She never complained, never argued, and never expected anyone to notice her. The family she worked for was wealthy and powerful. The man of the house was the CEO of a big company. Everyone feared him. His voice alone could silence a room. His daughter was around 10, cheerful and full of life, but often lonely. Lena adored her quietly from a distance. The house was large, but it always felt empty, filled with the sound of footsteps, not laughter. Lena didn't have much in life. Her little room at the back of the mansion had just a bed, a table, and a small photo of her late mother. Her mother had been the one who taught her how to play music when she was a child. They didn't have a piano, only a small broken keyboard, but her mother used to say, "You don't need fancy things to create something beautiful. You only need heart." Those words stayed with Lena even after her mother passed away. The mansion had a grand piano sitting in the corner of the living room. It was shiny and untouched, more like decoration than an instrument. No one ever played it. The CEO's daughter had taken piano lessons for a while, but she lost interest and the teacher stopped coming. Every time Lena dusted that piano, her hands would linger on the keys for a moment longer than needed. Her heart would ache a little, remembering the nights she and her mother played together in their small house. At night, when everyone had gone to bed and the house turned quiet, Lena would sometimes walk into the music room. She'd sit on the little stool and gently press a single key. The sound would echo through the empty room like a whisper. She never dared to play loudly. She didn't want to get caught. But slowly, note by note, she started to play again. Her fingers remembered the movements and her heart filled with emotions she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. The melody would drift softly through the halls, mixing sadness and hope in every sound. One night, as she played a piece she remembered from her childhood, she didn't notice the small figure standing by the door. The CEO's daughter had woken up for a glass of water and followed the sound of the piano. She stood there, eyes wide, watching Lena's fingers move gracefully across the keys. The music was different from anything she'd ever heard. It wasn't just pretty, it felt alive. She didn't interrupt. She just listened until Lena stopped playing, quietly wiping away a tear from her cheek. The little girl tiptoed back to her room, her heart strangely touched. The next morning, the girl rushed to her father's office. "Papa, the piano can sing again," she said with excitement. He barely looked up from his laptop. "What are you talking about?" he asked. She told him about the maid who played the piano at night, how beautiful it sounded, how it made her feel calm. The CEO gave a short laugh and said, "You must have been dreaming. Maids don't play pianos." He went back to his work, his tone flat, his face cold. The little girl frowned but said nothing more. Days went by and Lena continued her secret routine. Every night after finishing her chores, she would sit at the piano and lose herself in music. She didn't do it for praise or attention. It was her way of feeling alive. Her life during the day was full of silence and instructions. Clean this, wash that, serve food, disappear quietly. But at night she found her soul again in the sound of those keys. Music was the only thing that still belonged to her. Sometimes she would imagine her mother sitting beside her, nodding with pride. She imagined a world where she wasn't a maid, where people listened to her music not because they pitied her, but because it truly touched them. These dreams were her escape. But reality always came back with the morning light, reminding her that dreams were just that, dreams. The little girl started sneaking out of bed to listen more often. She would sit near the door, hugging her knees, watching Lena play. One night she clapped softly when the song ended. Lena froze, startled. "You were listening?" she whispered. The girl nodded, smiling. "You play so beautifully. Why don't you play when everyone's awake?" Lena blushed and smiled sadly. "This music isn't for everyone, dear. It's just something I do to remember someone I loved." The girl didn't quite understand, but she felt there was something special about the maid, something gentle and strong at the same time. She promised to keep Lena's secret, and from then on the music room became their secret place. Sometimes the girl would sit beside Lena, pressing random keys and giggling, while Lena laughed softly and taught her little melodies. One night, as the notes floated through the mansion again, the CEO couldn't sleep. He heard something faint, soft, distant, yet strangely comforting. He got up, walked to the top of the stairs, and paused. The melody reminded him of something he couldn't name. It wasn't a song he knew, but it carried a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He stood there for a moment, confused, then shook his head and went back to his room. He assumed it was a sound from outside, or perhaps some recording his daughter was playing. But the sound stayed in his mind. The next morning, during breakfast, he asked his daughter, "You said something about the maid playing the piano?" She nodded eagerly. "Yes, Papa. I told you she's amazing." He frowned, thinking maybe his daughter was exaggerating, but curiosity flickered somewhere deep inside him. He wanted to see it for himself, though he didn't admit it aloud. That night, Lena hesitated before sitting at the piano. She had noticed some of the security cameras around the hall, and it made her nervous. Still, she missed the feeling of playing. She told herself she'd only play for a few minutes. When she began, her fingers trembled at first, but the moment the melody took shape, her fear faded. The sound was pure, gentle, and emotional. It carried stories her mouth could never tell. Of her mother. Of loneliness, of quiet dreams that refused to die. Meanwhile, in his office upstairs, the CEO glanced at the monitor showing the living room camera. He froze when he saw her. The maid was playing the piano, completely lost in her music. He watched without moving. The way her hands moved over the keys, the look of emotion on her face, it didn't fit the image of a maid. There was something raw, something real in it. He muted everything else and just watched her play until the song ended. For a long moment after, he sat still, staring at the screen. The next morning, Lena had no idea that someone had seen her. She went on with her chores as usual, smiling politely, staying in the background. But in the CEO's mind, questions had begun to form. Who was she really? How could someone with such talent end up dusting furniture and scrubbing floors? He couldn't understand why her music had moved him so much. It felt like it had touched a part of him he had forgotten existed. Lena continued to play every night, unaware that her quiet passion had started to stir something in the heart of the cold, distant man she worked for. The house was still the same, but something invisible was changing. Music had found its way into a home that had forgotten what warmth felt like. And though Lena didn't know it yet, her life and the lives of those around her were about to change forever. The CEO's life was nothing but numbers, meetings, and long phone calls. His days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. Everything in his world had to make sense: profits, reports, performance. There was no room for emotions or distractions. People respected him, but they also feared him. He liked it that way. It made things easier. But something inside him had changed since the night he saw the maid play the piano. It wasn't a feeling he understood. He couldn't explain why the sound of her music kept echoing in his mind, even when he was sitting in the boardroom. There was something honest in it, something real that he hadn't felt in years. At home, his daughter had noticed his silence. She tried to ask him again about the piano maid, but he only nodded without saying much. He didn't want to admit that he had seen her, that her music had affected him. For a man who built his life on logic, being moved by a maid's song felt like weakness. That evening, when he returned home, he found his daughter sitting by the piano, waiting. "Will she play again tonight?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he sat down on the couch nearby, pretending to read a document. In truth, he was waiting too. As the night deepened, the maid finished her chores. The house grew quiet, and she walked softly toward the music room. She didn't know anyone was awake. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The first notes were like a whisper. Then slowly the melody began to flow, soft, emotional, full of life. Her music filled the air, wrapping the silence in warmth. The CEO's daughter sat still, enchanted. Her father didn't move either. His heart tightened with every note, memories flashing through his mind. His late wife, their wedding, the laughter they once shared before everything became about business. When the song ended, he stood up suddenly, his expression unreadable. The maid turned around and froze when she saw him standing there. She jumped to her feet, bowing slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have." He raised his hand, stopping her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was calm, but his eyes held something she couldn't read. "My mother taught me." she said quietly. She loved music. I used to play with her before she passed away. He nodded slowly. And you never studied professionally? She shook her head. We couldn't afford lessons. But music, it just stayed with me. It's all I have. The CEO looked at her for a long moment, then simply turned and walked away. He didn't say another word. The maid stood there, confused and nervous. She thought she had done something wrong. She didn't sleep that night, afraid she might lose her job. But the next morning, nothing happened. The CEO didn't mention it again. Yet something subtle began to shift in the house. He became quieter, less impatient. He even spent more time with his daughter, who noticed he smiled more than before, even if just slightly. One afternoon, during a meeting, one of his managers was presenting a new campaign idea. It was all about numbers and market reach, but it felt cold. The CEO interrupted, saying, "It has no soul." His team stared at him in surprise. He had never used that word before. "We need something that connects to people's hearts," he added, tapping his pen against the table. They all nodded, confused but eager to please. Later that night, when the maid went to clean the study, she noticed the piano lid open. She hesitated but didn't touch it. As she turned to leave, the CEO entered the room. He looked tired, his jacket still on, tie loosened. "You can play," he said simply. She stared at him, unsure if she heard correctly. "Sir?" He nodded. "Go ahead. I need to think." Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. The room was dim, only a soft lamp on. She started playing, a slow, thoughtful tune that filled the room like gentle rain. He sat at his desk, eyes on his laptop screen but ears on her music. Each note seemed to wash away a little of the weight he carried. When she finished, she stood up quickly, about to leave, but he said quietly, "You remind me that life used to sound different." She didn't know what to say, so she simply bowed and left the room. Over the next few days, the mansion felt lighter. The daughter laughed more, the staff seemed less tense, and the CEO began to notice things he had ignored for years. The way the sun hit the garden in the morning, the smell of fresh tea, the small smiles people gave him. It was as if music had quietly brought warmth back into his home. But not everyone saw it that way. One of the senior house staff didn't like how the maid was suddenly noticed by the boss. Rumors began to spread among the workers. Whispers that she was trying to impress him, that she was crossing her limits. The maid heard the murmurs, but she kept quiet. She knew the truth, and that was enough. One evening, the CEO's daughter ran up to Lena, her face bright with excitement. "Papa wants you to play for his guests tomorrow," she said. Lena froze. "Guests? What guests?" "He's having an important dinner," the girl said. "He told me to ask you to play something soft while they eat." Lena didn't know what to think. Was it a test, a trap, or had he really meant it? She didn't want to embarrass him or herself. She stayed awake half the night, her thoughts spinning. The next day came quickly. The mansion was full of movement. Chefs preparing food, staff setting the long dining table, guests arriving in expensive cars. Lena stayed in the background, cleaning quietly, hoping maybe he'd forget about the idea. But when dinner began, the CEO looked toward her and gave a small nod. Her heart raced, but she walked to the piano. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone noticed her. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few seconds felt like forever. But then her hands found confidence. The melody floated through the air, soft and emotional. The guests, who had been talking about business and profits, stopped and listened. The sound carried warmth into every corner of the room. When she finished, there was silence, then soft applause. The CEO didn't say a word, but his eyes showed something deep. It wasn't pity. It was respect. After the dinner, while everyone was leaving, one of the guests asked him, "That was beautiful." "Who was the pianist?" He replied simply, "She's the maid." The guest looked shocked, but the CEO didn't explain further. When everyone was gone, he found Lena near the kitchen. "You played beautifully," he said quietly. "Thank you," she bowed, trying to hide her smile. "Thank you, sir." That night, she sat on her small bed, looking at her hands. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a maid, but as a person. Someone had listened, really listened, and that meant more than anything. But somewhere deep inside, she also felt nervous. Things had changed, and change often came with consequences. Still, when she thought about the way the CEO's eyes softened as she played, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Music had done something neither words nor wealth could do. It had opened hearts that had been closed for years. And though she didn't know what awaited her next, Lena knew one thing for sure. She would keep playing. Because music was her truth, her voice, and maybe, just maybe, her destiny. Days passed quietly after the dinner where Lena played. The atmosphere in the mansion had changed, though no one said it out loud. The air felt lighter. The staff seemed calmer. Even the CEO's daughter laughed more often. But for Lena, things felt both beautiful and uncertain. She couldn't forget how the guests had looked at her that night. The surprise in their eyes when they found out she was the maid. Some were impressed, but others looked confused, even uncomfortable. She wondered what they must have thought. Maybe they thought she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. The idea bothered her for days. The CEO, however, was different now. He didn't talk much, but there was something in the way he looked at her when she passed by. Something thoughtful, almost gentle. She didn't know what it meant, and she didn't want to assume anything. He was her employer, after all. Still, deep down she could feel that her music had touched him somehow. One evening, while cleaning the study, Lena found a sheet of paper lying open on the desk. It was full of handwritten notes, phrases like emotion in business, heart connects deeper than profit, music as inspiration. She smiled softly. It seemed her music had left its mark beyond the piano room. Later that week, the CEO came home early, which was unusual. The sun was setting and the mansion glowed in warm light. He walked into the music room and found her dusting the piano. She quickly stepped aside, apologizing, but he shook his head. "You don't have to stop," he said quietly. She hesitated, unsure what he meant. He gestured toward the piano. "Play something," her heart raced. She hadn't played in front of him since the dinner. "Are you sure, sir?" He nodded. "I've had a long day. I could use some peace." Lena sat down slowly and began to play. The melody was soft at first, then stronger, filled with emotion. Her fingers moved effortlessly, each note flowing like water. The room filled with warmth and quiet strength. The CEO stood near the window listening. His thoughts wandered far from his work. He remembered his own struggles, the moments he had buried under his success, the people he had lost, the joy he had forgotten. Somehow this simple maid's music was pulling those memories back, but not painfully this time. It was like she was helping him heal. When the song ended, there was silence for a long moment. Then he said softly, "You play as if you've lived many lives." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe music lets me live what I couldn't in real life." He looked at her almost in admiration, but before he could say more, the door opened. The head housekeeper stood there, surprised to see them. "Sir, the dinner is ready," she said quickly, glancing at Lena with a hint of disapproval. The CEO nodded and left without another word. Lena could feel the housekeeper's eyes on her as she lowered her gaze and left the room quietly. That night, rumors started again among the staff. They whispered about how the boss was spending too much time around the maid. Some said she was trying to gain attention. Others said she was lucky. Lena heard them all, but she didn't defend herself. What would be the point? People believe what they want. Still, she couldn't deny that the way the CEO had listened to her made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt before. Not as a worker, not as a servant, but as a person. A few days later, the CEO had to travel for a business meeting in another city. The house grew quiet again in his absence. The daughter missed him, and Lena spent time comforting her with stories and music. The little girl began learning small pieces on the piano again. "Papa said your music makes people feel things they forget they have," the girl told her one afternoon. "That's like magic," Lena smiled softly. "It's not magic. It's just honesty. Music speaks when words can't." When the CEO returned home a few days later, he was different. He seemed inspired, full of new ideas. He gathered his company's creative team and told them he wanted to create something meaningful, not just profitable. "People remember feelings, not numbers," he said in the meeting. No one knew where that line came from, but for him it was clear. It came from the sound of a maid's piano. That weekend, he hosted another dinner, this time smaller, more personal. He invited a few close friends, artists, writers, musicians. He didn't tell Lena to play this time, but during the evening, one of his guests noticed the piano and asked, "Who plays that beautiful instrument?" Before the CEO could answer, his daughter spoke up proudly, "Our maid plays. She's amazing." Lena turned red with embarrassment, but the CEO smiled. "It's true," he said. She plays better than most professionals I've met. The guests looked surprised. Would you play for us? One of them asked gently. Lena hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly, but the CEO nodded reassuringly. Go ahead, he said. Just be yourself. She sat down and began to play a song she had written herself, a piece filled with emotion, a mix of sadness and hope. The guests fell silent, drawn into the story her fingers told. Some closed their eyes, others simply watched in awe. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds before a wave of applause filled the air. One of the musicians approached her afterward. You have something rare, he said sincerely. Not just skill, but soul. Have you ever thought about performing? Lena shook her head quickly. I'm not a performer, sir. You're not just anything, the CEO interrupted gently. His tone was calm, but there was a depth in his voice. Don't let the world tell you that. She didn't know how to respond. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back and smiled. Later that night, after everyone had left, the CEO stayed in the music room, sitting near the piano. Lena came in quietly to clean up. He looked at her and said, I've spent years building things I thought mattered, but when I hear you play, I realize how much I've missed the human side of life. She looked down, unsure what to say. Music saved me, she said softly. When life felt heavy, I played. It reminded me that beauty still exists, even in pain. He nodded, and maybe it's reminding me of the same thing. That night, Lena sat in her small room longer than usual, staring out the window. She wasn't sure what her place in this world was anymore. She was still a maid, but her music had crossed boundaries she never meant to cross. And somewhere in that big house, a powerful man was rethinking what really mattered because of her melodies. She didn't know where it would lead. She didn't want to dream too big. But for the first time in her life, she felt her gift had meaning, not just for herself, but for others. The next morning, as the sun rose and the light filled the mansion, the CEO stood by the piano, running his fingers lightly across the keys. He couldn't play, not like her, but he could feel the energy she had left behind. His daughter walked in and smiled. Papa, are you thinking about the maid again? She teased. He smiled faintly. I'm thinking about what she's teaching me without even trying. The little girl tilted her head. What's that? He looked at her with a soft smile. That even the simplest people can carry the most beautiful stories. Lena, walking past the doorway, heard those words. She stopped for a second, her eyes filling with quiet emotion. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just smiled and went back to work, her heart lighter than ever before. She had no idea that her journey had only just begun, and that soon, her music would reach far beyond the walls of that mansion. The next few weeks went by peacefully, though something bigger seemed to be building quietly in the background. The CEO had started to change, not in how he worked, but in how he saw the world. The people in his company noticed it too. He wasn't just focused on profits anymore. He began to talk about purpose, creativity, and emotion in business meetings. His employees were surprised, even inspired. Lena didn't know about any of this. She was still doing her usual work, sweeping the floors, dusting the rooms, taking care of the little girl. But now, when she passed the piano, she didn't feel invisible anymore. There was meaning in her music, and it had reached someone who truly understood. One morning, while she was polishing the dining table, the CEO's daughter ran up to her with excitement. Papa is planning a big event, she said. It's going to be very important. There'll be so many people, even from other countries. Lena smiled, amused by the girl's excitement. That sounds wonderful, she said. Yes. And he told me something last night, the little girl whispered, leaning close. He said he wants you to play again. Lena froze for a moment. Play? At the event? The girl nodded happily. He said your music makes people feel things they can't explain. He wants everyone to feel that. Lena's heart began to race. The thought of playing in front of strangers, especially powerful people, terrified her. I'm just a maid, she said softly. I don't belong in such a place. The girl frowned. You're not just anything. Papa says your music has more power than all his meetings combined. Those words stayed with Lena the whole day. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept returning to what the girl had said. The idea of performing in front of so many people felt impossible. But deep inside, a small part of her wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, it could happen. That evening, when the CEO returned home, he called her to the study. Lena's hands were trembling slightly as she stepped inside. He looked up from his desk and said calmly, I hope my daughter didn't scare you with her excitement." She gave a nervous smile. "She said something about an event, sir." He nodded. "Yes, it's a company gathering, our annual celebration. This year, I want it to be different. I want it to remind people that success means nothing without emotion, without heart." He paused, then added, "I want you to play at the event." Lena's breath caught. "Sir, I don't think I can. I've never played in front of so many people." He looked at her with understanding. "You've played in front of me," he said gently. "And that wasn't easy either, was it?" She shook her head. "No, but this is different." He leaned back in his chair. "You have a gift, Lena. It's not about being perfect. It's about being real. When you play, people listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. That's what I want them to feel." His words were kind, but the weight of them made her nervous. "I'm afraid," she admitted softly. "Everyone is afraid before they do something that matters," he said simply. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes lowered, her thoughts spinning. She wanted to say no, to run from the idea, but when she looked up again, she saw sincerity in his expression. For the first time, someone truly believed in her. "I'll try," she said quietly. In the days that followed, the mansion buzzed with preparation. The staff cleaned every corner. Decorators came and went, and the kitchen filled with the smell of delicious food. The CEO was busier than ever, but he found time every evening to sit for a few minutes and listen to Lena practice. At first, she was nervous. Her hands would shake and she'd make mistakes, but he never scolded or rushed her. He just listened quietly, nodding at the end, sometimes with a faint smile. "You're improving," he'd say. "Don't think about them. Just think about the story you're telling." His daughter would sit nearby too, cheering Lena on, sometimes clapping after every song. Slowly, Lena began to find her rhythm again. Her music grew stronger, clearer, filled with the warmth that came straight from her heart. The day of the event arrived faster than she expected. The company's main hall was beautifully decorated with golden lights and flowers. Guests in suits and gowns filled the room, talking and laughing. There was music, food, and the energy of success in the air. But Lena stayed behind the stage, her hands cold, her heart pounding. She could hear the CEO giving his speech. His voice was confident yet different, softer, more human. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not just our achievements, but the spirit that keeps us going. We are reminded that talent and heart can come from anywhere." Lena closed her eyes as she heard those words. She knew what was coming next. "And to remind us of that," he continued, "I want you to listen to someone whose music changed how I see life itself. Please welcome her." The crowd clapped politely, not knowing what to expect. Lena stepped onto the stage slowly, her eyes down. The hall fell silent as people noticed the maid's uniform. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some people looked confused, others curious, but Lena didn't look up. She walked to the piano, took a deep breath, and sat down. Her fingers touched the keys gently. The first note echoed in the quiet hall, then another and another. The melody began to grow. It was simple, pure, and full of emotion. The audience, unsure at first, soon became still. The room seemed to breathe with her music. Each note carried a piece of her life. The struggle, the hope, the love she lost, the strength she found again. It wasn't just a performance. It was her story. The CEO watched from the side, his eyes heavy with emotion. By the time she reached the final part, the hall was completely silent. People were holding their breath, lost in the moment. And when the last note faded, there was a long pause before the sound of applause filled the room. It started slowly, then grew louder and louder until everyone was on their feet. The CEO's daughter ran to the stage, hugging Lena tightly. "You did it?" she whispered through happy tears. The CEO walked up next, his face full of pride. He looked at her for a long moment, then, to everyone's surprise, he bowed his head deeply before her. It wasn't out of pity or formality, it was respect. Pure, genuine respect. The audience gasped softly, moved by the gesture. Cameras flashed, people recorded the moment, and Lena stood there in disbelief. Her heart felt too full to speak. When the applause finally settled, the CEO turned to the crowd and said, "Talent has no title. Greatness doesn't depend on where you come from. Sometimes, the most extraordinary music comes from the quietest corners of life." Tears filled Lena's eyes. She had never imagined such a day. For years she had been invisible, just a maid cleaning rooms in Silence. But tonight her music had made even the most powerful people stop, listen, and feel. After the event, people came to meet her, shaking her hand, asking about her story. She was shy, overwhelmed, but she smiled through it all. The CEO's daughter held her hand tightly the whole time, proud and happy. When the guests left and the hall was quiet again, the CEO approached her. "You did more than play music tonight," he said softly. "You reminded people of what truly matters." Lena looked at him, her voice trembling. "Thank you for believing in me," he smiled. "No," he said. "Thank you for teaching me to listen." That night, Lena walked back to her small room, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She sat by the window, staring at the stars, smiling through tears. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like she didn't belong. She felt free. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing clearly. Her music had found its place in the world, and it had changed more than one life. The night of the event changed everything for Lena. The next morning, the house was filled with quiet excitement. The news had already started spreading. Videos of her performance were circulating online. People were talking about the mysterious maid who played like an angel and made even a powerful CEO bow before her. At first, Lena didn't know about it. She went about her morning as usual, sweeping the hallways, polishing the glass tables, trying to return to her routine. But something was different. Wherever she went, the other workers looked at her with admiration. Some smiled, some nodded with quiet respect. It felt strange, almost unreal. When the CEO's daughter saw her, she ran across the room and hugged her tightly. "You're famous," she said, laughing. "Everyone's talking about you." Lena smiled shyly. "I don't think I'm famous," she said. "I just played from my heart." The little girl shook her head. "You don't know how many people watched the video, do you?" "It's everywhere. People are crying when they hear you play." Lena blinked, confused. "Crying? Yes," the girl said. "Papa showed me comments. Some said your music reminded them of their childhood. Some said it gave them hope again. You made people feel things." Those words touched Lena deeply. She had never imagined her music could reach so many hearts. For her, it had always been a private language, something that spoke only to herself. Later that day, the CEO called her to his office again. He was sitting by the window, holding his tablet, watching a video. Her video. When she entered, he looked up and said, "I think the world just discovered something beautiful." Lena hesitated near the door. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, sir," she said softly. He smiled gently. "You didn't have to. Real things never need to be forced. They find their own way." He turned the screen toward her. The video had millions of views already. Comments flooded below. Strangers thanking her for her music, telling their stories, sharing how her melody touched their lives. Lena's eyes filled with tears as she read the messages. "I never thought something so simple could matter this much," she whispered. "It's not simple," the CEO said. "You reminded people that emotion is power, and that's something this world forgets too often." He paused for a moment, then continued. "I want to help you, Lena, not as your employer, but as someone who believes in you. Would you let me do that?" Lena looked at him, unsure how to respond. "Help me how?" "I want you to study music properly," he said. "You have a natural gift, but I want you to have the chance to grow. I know people who would gladly teach you." Her heart raced. "Study? But sir, I don't have the money for that. And besides, I can't just stop working. This job," he raised a hand gently. "Don't worry about money. I'll cover the costs. And as for your job, it will always be here if you need it. But I don't think you'll be coming back as a maid. I think the world has different plans for you." Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," he replied softly. After a long pause, she nodded. "Yes." And so, her journey began again. This time, not as a maid cleaning rooms in silence, but as a musician learning to share her heart through every note. Weeks turned into months. Lena started taking lessons from one of the best music teachers in the city. At first, she was nervous. She felt out of place among students who had studied music all their lives. But her teacher noticed something special in her from the very first day. "You don't play by rules," he told her. "You play by feeling. That's something you can't teach." Every day she practiced for hours. Sometimes she would lose track of time. The more she learned, the more her world opened up. She discovered new ways to express herself, new melodies that carried deeper emotions. Meanwhile, the CEO followed her progress quietly. He attended her small recitals, always sitting in the back, never making a scene. His daughter would run up to Lena afterward with flowers and say, "Papa says you're getting even better." One evening after a long day of practice, Lena returned home and found a letter on her doorstep. It was an invitation. A music foundation wanted her to perform at a charity concert. The event was being held to raise funds for children who couldn't afford education. She stared at the letter for a long time, unable to believe it. She called the CEO's office the next morning to tell him. He smiled when he heard her excitement. "That's wonderful," he said. "You've come a long way, Lena. I'm proud of you." When the night of the concert arrived, Lena stood backstage again, her hands trembling just like the first time. But this time she wasn't afraid. She looked out at the audience. Children, families, donors, people from all walks of life. Somewhere in the crowd she spotted the CEO and his daughter smiling at her. The lights dimmed. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano. As her fingers touched the keys, the same calmness returned to her. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, then grew into a wave of emotion. It carried everything she had lived through, the struggle, the kindness she received, and the hope she wanted to share. The hall was silent. People listened, their eyes glistening with tears. Some closed their eyes, some held hands. The children in the front row smiled as if they understood every word her music was saying. When the last note faded, the applause was thunderous. But what touched her most wasn't the sound. It was the faces. Faces filled with warmth, kindness, and belief. She realized that this was where she belonged. Not behind walls, not in silence, but here, where her heart could speak. After the performance, a journalist approached her and asked, "You've inspired millions, Lena. What keeps you grounded?" She smiled gently. "I think it's because I never forget where I started. Music found me when I had nothing. I just wanted to find others the same way." The CEO and his daughter joined her after the crowd began to leave. He looked at her proudly. "Do you remember the night I first heard you play?" he asked. She nodded, smiling. "I'll never forget it. I told you your music had a story," he said. "Now the whole world knows it." The little girl tugged at Lena's hand. "Can we have ice cream to celebrate?" Lena laughed, her heart full. "Of course," she said. "We can all celebrate." In the months that followed, Lena continued performing at events not for fame or money, but for meaning. She played at hospitals, schools, and small community centers. Everywhere she went, her music brought light. People didn't just see her as a maid-turned-musician. They saw her as a symbol of hope. She showed them that no matter where you start, talent and heart can take you places you never dreamed of. Years later, when she looked back on her life, she still remembered the first time she touched that piano in the big empty hall, when she thought nobody was listening. Now she knew someone always was. Life has a way of hearing the quietest voices, especially when they speak with honesty and love. And as she played on stage one evening, her music floating through the air like a soft breeze, she caught sight of the CEO sitting in the front row, his eyes closed, smiling peacefully. The little girl, now older, sat beside him, still cheering her on. In that moment, Lena understood something beautiful. Music had connected them all. It had crossed walls, erased titles, and touched souls. Her journey had begun in silence, but it ended in harmony. And that harmony would live on, long after the last note faded away.